I am Arthur Sterling. I am 29 years old, and for the entirety of my adult life, my family treated me like a permanent stain on their absolutely flawless public image. Just a few months ago, while I was sitting quietly at an incredibly expensive French restaurant for my older brother's engagement dinner, my parents explicitly told his incredibly wealthy fiancée that I was a lost cause. They painted me as a charity case who needed a financial handout just to survive the winter. They openly laughed at my expense in front of a private dining room full of people. They mocked my cheap clothes. They mocked my ambition. They mocked my very existence, reducing my life's work to a pathetic joke. But there was one massive, undeniable secret they did not know. The stupid little computer hobby they were relentlessly making fun of was actually Quantum Nexus, a global logistics technology firm that had just been valued in the billions. And the high-powered Silicon Valley investor they were trying so desperately to impress, my brother's beautiful, ruthless new fiancée, had been aggressively begging my legal team for a meeting for 8 straight months. Today, the tables have completely turned, and the family that once treated me like absolute garbage is actively begging me to save their crumbling financial empire from total ruin. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled their arrogance piece by piece, hit that like button if you believe that karma never misses an address. And do not forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. I read every single one of them. Now, let's go back to the exact moment the nightmare peaked. The air in the private wine cellar room of Le Jardin smelled of aged oak, expensive truffles, and suffocating old money arrogance. This was not a restaurant where you just walked in and asked for a table. This was a place where the waiters wore pristine white gloves, the menus did not list any prices, and the maitre d' knew exactly how much your real estate portfolio was worth before you even handed over your coat. My father, Richard Sterling, leaned across the crisp, heavily starched white tablecloth. He gestured toward my brother Preston's new fiancée, Victoria, with his signature practice charm dialed all the way up. It was the exact same fake, sugary warmth he used when he was trying to convince wealthy, grieving widows to hand over their late husband's inheritance, or when he was aggressively pitching a new real estate development at the local HOA meeting. He pointed his heavy crystal wine glass directly at me, the expensive ruby liquid swirling dangerously near the rim. He told Victoria not to mind me. He called me their permanent work in progress. He said I was still trying to find my footing in the real world, speaking about me as if I were a confused toddler taking my first steps rather than a 29-year-old man sitting right across from him. Victoria did not offer a polite smile. She was a senior partner at a massive venture capital firm in Silicon Valley, a woman who brokered 9-figure deals before her morning coffee. She possessed sharp, incredibly intelligent eyes that missed absolutely nothing. She was dressed impeccably in a tailored charcoal blazer, her posture rigid and fiercely professional. She just stared at me across the table, her brow furrowed slightly, a tiny crease forming above her nose, as if she were trying to solve a highly complex mathematical equation. She was evaluating me, not with the suffocating judgment of my family, but with a strange, clinical curiosity that I could not quite read. My parents had built a boutique wealth management firm in Chicago completely from the ground up. They were titans in their own minds, rulers of a very specific, very shallow kingdom. My older brother, Preston, was the undisputed golden child. He followed perfectly in their footsteps, wearing custom-tailored designer suits that cost more than my first car. He leased flashy European sports cars, wore watches that cost as much as a suburban house, and spoke entirely in hollow corporate buzzwords. Their entire world was loud, incredibly polished, and entirely obsessed with perception. They measured human worth by the size of your base salary, the exclusivity of your country club memberships, and the designer label meticulously stitched into the lining of your jacket. If you did not have a high-yield college fund to brag about or a massive stock portfolio to leverage, you were essentially invisible to them. You simply did not matter. And then there was me. I never wanted to manage portfolios or siphon management fees from hardworking people's retirement accounts. I wanted to build something real. I wanted to disrupt a broken, archaic industry that relied on outdated spreadsheets and endless bureaucracy. So, I started my own company from the corner of my drafty, incredibly small studio apartment on the wrong side of the city. My life was the quiet, relentless hum of a server rack, fueled by stale black coffee, cheap instant noodles from Walmart, and endless sleepless nights staring at thousands of lines of code. To my family, my strict refusal to attend their endless charity galas and my faded, comfortable thrift store sweaters were not sacrifices for a startup. They were undeniable, concrete proof that I was a complete failure. They did not just misunderstand my choices. They were profoundly, deeply ashamed of me. At that dinner table, surrounded by vintage wine bottles, the insults kept coming, relentless and sharp. My mother, Eleanor, reached across the table and patted my hand. The gesture was dripping with a pitying condescension that burned my skin worse than a physical slap. Her nails were perfectly manicured, her wrists dripping in heavy diamond bracelets paid for by other people's management fees. She told Victoria with a tragic, theatrical little sigh that I was just tinkering with a computer thing. She made it sound like I was playing with building blocks in a sandbox. Preston chimed in immediately with a smug, deeply punchable grin. He adjusted his imported silk tie, a gift from a client he had recently overcharged. He proudly announced to the table that they had generously offered to get me a basic internship at their firm. He said I could be answering phones, fetching coffee, and filing paperwork, just to get me used to a professional environment. But, he added with a sneer, I stubbornly liked my freedom. He made the word freedom sound like a highly contagious disease. Victoria tried to steer the conversation into something productive. She turned her sharp gaze directly toward me, her voice easily cutting through the noise of my family's endless self-congratulatory chatter. She asked me what kind of project I was working on, specifically inquiring about what market gap my software was trying to fill. Before I could even open my mouth to answer her, my father cut in. He waved his hand dismissively in my direction, a gesture of total disrespect, as if swatting away a pesky, irrelevant fly. He told her not to bother asking because it was incredibly boring. He said I was just building some app, one of a million useless apps out there in the world. He sighed deeply, a heavy sound meant to convey to Victoria that my very existence was a heavy, tragic cross he heroically carried on his broad, successful shoulders. They proceeded to discuss me for the next 10 solid minutes as if I was not sitting right across from them. They painted a vivid picture of a lost, deeply confused boy who refused to grow up, a parasitic drain on their perfect, wealthy legacy. I felt the heat rising in my cheeks. My jaw tightened so hard I felt a dull ache radiating through my molars. I gripped my linen napkin under the table, but I said absolutely nothing. I simply focused on the cold condensation sliding slowly down the side of my crystal water glass. I knew exactly who I was. I knew exactly what was sitting securely in my corporate bank account. But I let them talk. I let them dig their own graves, shovelful by condescending shovelful. To truly understand how I maintained my absolute, icy composure in that freezing dining room while my own blood tore me apart, you have to know what it is like being a silent ghost in your own home for over 2 decades. I thought the worst of their betrayal was buried in the past. I thought I had seen the lowest depths of their cruelty. I was incredibly, dangerously wrong. The suffocating dinner at Le Jardin was not an isolated incident. It was just the grand finale of a lifetime of quiet dismissals and highly calculated humiliations. Growing up in the Sterling household meant you were only as valuable as your last quantifiable, publicly brag-worthy achievement. Preston was the star high school quarterback, the aggressive debate team champion, the golden son who secured a massive college fund from our grandparents and parlayed it into an Ivy League degree. He was the absolute poster child for their flawless parenting. I, on the other hand, was the quiet kid who took apart broken radios to see how the circuits worked. I preferred the predictable, logical company of motherboards over country club socialites, and I spent my weekends writing complex code in the damp basement while they attended golf tournaments. My parents did not respect or understand anything they could not immediately brag about to their wealthy friends. A month before that awful engagement dinner, my parents hosted a massive summer solstice party at their sprawling, multi-million-dollar lake house. It was the premier networking event of the season, a meticulously curated gathering designed specifically to flaunt their wealth and secure new business. They invited major angel investors, senior law firm partners, local politicians, and anyone who had a net worth north of $5 million. The expensive caterers served imported caviar and vintage champagne on heavy silver platters, and a live string quartet played softly in the background on the manicured lawn. I only found out about the party when I was scrolling on my phone and saw the glossy photos on my cousin's social media feed. I saw my entire family clinking champagne glasses on the beautifully lit cedar dock. Preston was there, grinning arrogantly in a bespoke linen suit, his arm wrapped tightly around Victoria. My parents were glowing under the patio lights, shaking hands with prominent CEOs and holding court like royalty. Everyone was there. Everyone except me. When I called my mother the next morning to ask why I was so blatantly excluded from a family event, her voice was light, breezy, and utterly devoid of any genuine guilt. She called me sweetheart, her tone dripping with that fake, saccharine sweetness she usually reserved for difficult, high-net-worth clients. She claimed they simply did not want to overwhelm me. She said it was a very high-level crowd with lots of highly technical talk about global markets, volatile interest rates, and aggressive real estate acquisitions. She actually had the unmitigated nerve to say she did not want me to feel inadequate surrounded by so much towering success. Inadequate. That specific, razor-sharp word burned a permanent hole directly through my chest. It was not a simple oversight. They did not just forget to mail me an embossed invitation. It was a deliberate, calculated quarantine. They were actively protecting their pristine, highly profitable brand from the stain of my perceived mediocrity. They honestly thought my presence, my lack of a six-figure salary, and my cheap, unbranded clothes would ruin their chances of landing a lucrative commercial real estate deal or securing a new, incredibly wealthy client for their wealth management firm. But the quiet, private exclusions were absolutely nothing compared to the public humiliations. The public executions of my character were always much sharper, specifically designed to elevate their own status by stepping directly on my neck. I vividly remember the 4th of July barbecue the previous year. We were standing on the patio of our wealthy neighbor's sprawling estate, a massive property with perfectly manicured lawns, a private tennis court, and a pristine infinity pool. My father was holding court by the massive, custom-built outdoor grill, surrounded by his most important business associates. Among them was Mr. Henderson, a very prominent, highly feared lawyer who controlled a massive family trust fund and handled high-profile, incredibly messy divorce and custody cases for the city's elite. My father bellowed loudly over the sound of the crackling fire and the popping fireworks, proudly announcing to the entire patio that Preston was officially taking over the firm's highly lucrative Asia accounts next quarter. He bragged endlessly about Preston's massive promotion, inflating the actual numbers to make it sound even more impressive than it already was. Then, Mr. Henderson, simply trying to be polite and inclusive, turned his attention to me. He asked what Arthur was up to these days. My father chuckled. It was a rich, booming sound that echoed across the stone patio. He made actual air quotes with his perfectly manicured hands, still holding the heavy stainless steel grilling tongs. He told the entire group of wealthy men that I was still desperately finding myself. He said I was playing around with little computers in a basement somewhere, waiting patiently for the real world to finally knock on my door and wake me up. The entire group erupted in genuine, booming laughter. My father used my entire life as a cheap, easy punchline to make himself look like the benevolent, incredibly patient patriarch dealing with a deeply disappointing, eccentric son. Right at that exact, humiliating moment, Preston pulled up to the sweeping circular driveway in a brand-new, slate-gray Porsche 911. He revved the engine aggressively loud, ensuring every single person stopped what they were doing to admire his expensive new toy. He stepped out, tossing the keys carelessly to the hired valet, and walked over to the grill with that signature, infuriatingly arrogant smirk plastered across his face. He clapped me hard on the shoulder, his grip a little too tight, leaning in close so only I could hear him over the chatter. He told me that maybe if I stopped playing with my little computer toys and got a real job with a real salary, I could afford to buy the tires on his new ride. I drove home that night in my 10-year-old, heavily dented sedan. The check engine light was glaring brightly on the dashboard, and the air conditioning was completely broken, blowing hot air into my face. My father's mocking laughter rang endlessly in my ears, echoing in the hot, stagnant air of the car. It was the unmistakable, heartbreaking sound of my own blood telling the world I was an absolute joke. I gripped the cheap plastic steering wheel until my knuckles turned completely white, my fingernails digging painfully into my palms. I did not yell. I did not violently punch the dashboard. I made a silent, unbreakable, ironclad vow right then and there. I would build a corporate empire so massive, so undeniably powerful, that it would cast a permanent, freezing shadow over their entire world, and I would do it without ever asking them for a single solitary dime. That searing, deep-rooted pain became my ultimate fuel. When my parents were sitting at Thanksgiving dinners discussing their upcoming luxury ski vacations to Aspen, I was intensely researching global supply chain inefficiencies. When Preston was loudly bragging about his massive year-end holiday bonuses, I was quietly networking with brilliant software engineers on anonymous coding forums late into the night. I learned very early on that achieving massive success in absolute silence is the deadliest, most effective weapon against people who desperately thrive on noise and constant validation. But prolonged isolation makes you vulnerable. It creates a desperate, gnawing hunger for any small scrap of genuine family connection. And that brings me to Uncle Charles. Charles was my father's younger brother, the supposedly cool, approachable uncle who always seemed a bit more rebellious, a bit more grounded than the rest of the fiercely competitive Sterling clan. He was the absolute only family member who occasionally called my phone to ask how my little startup was actually doing. He would drop by my terrible, cramped apartment, bring me a decent cup of black coffee, listen to my endless struggles with rising server costs, and pat me warmly on the back. I genuinely thought I had one true ally in the family. I was so totally blinded by my desperate need for support that I never stopped to question his true motives. I poured my entire heart out to Charles. I told him about my grand ambitions, my complex technical hurdles, my deep fears of failure, and my wild dreams of landing a major corporate client. He would nod sympathetically, telling me to keep pushing forward, assuring me that I was on the brink of something truly great. I thought he was my safe harbor in a family entirely made up of sharks. I was about to find out that the harbor was heavily rigged with explosives, and the uncle I trusted was the exact person holding the detonator. The early, grueling days of Quantum Nexus were brutally hard, a true, relentless trial by fire. I partnered with a brilliant, highly eccentric lead engineer named Marcus, and we practically lived in my tiny, poorly ventilated apartment. We survived on cheap ramen noodles, slept in shifts on the hard hardwood floor, and coded until our eyes burned and our fingers physically cramped. We were building an incredibly complex AI-driven predictive network that could perfectly optimize global shipping routes in real time. It was a revolutionary system capable of instantly predicting severe weather patterns, tracking port delays, and calculating fluctuating fuel costs, effectively saving massive logistics companies billions of dollars annually. We were incredibly close to a massive, industry-altering breakthrough, but we were completely and utterly out of money. The exorbitant server hosting fees were actively drowning us. My personal credit cards were completely maxed out. I desperately needed a steady, reliable salary just to keep the lights on and the servers running while we finalized the final beta version of the software. I swallowed every ounce of my pride and formally applied for a highly competitive senior logistics analyst position at a major corporate firm downtown. It was the absolute perfect job to fund the company while keeping me actively engaged in the industry. I prepared intensely for weeks. I bought a cheap suit from a discount store, tailored it myself with a needle and thread to make it look somewhat decent, and I completely nailed the grueling interview process. The senior hiring manager practically guaranteed me the position on the spot. We explicitly discussed salary expectations, benefits, and he told me he was actively drafting the official offer letter. I was ecstatic. I finally had a secure lifeline. Then, exactly 3 days later, I received a cold, entirely generic rejection email. No explanation, no constructive feedback, no polite phone call, Just a slammed door and a standard form letter wishing me luck in my future endeavors. I was devastated. I sat heavily on my floor in the dark, convinced I had fundamentally failed again, heavily convinced that maybe my arrogant family was actually right about me all along. It was not until several agonizing months later, during a routine late-night server audit to free up digital space, that I stumbled upon the horrifying, undeniable truth. I was clearing out an old, shared family cloud drive that my parents used for securely storing tax documents, for 01k statements, and sensitive inheritance paperwork. I noticed a hidden folder buried deep within the directory, named simply with my initials. Inside was a single, compressed audio recording file. It was a voicemail that Preston had intentionally forwarded to my father to proudly brag about his handiwork. I hit play, the crisp sound echoing loudly in my quiet, empty apartment. It was Preston's unmistakable voice, speaking directly to the senior hiring manager of the exact corporate firm I had applied to. Preston introduced himself smoothly as a deeply concerned family member and a senior wealth manager at Sterling Financial. He spoke professionally, with that exact same venomous, persuasive charm my father constantly used. He blatantly lied, warning the manager that I was mentally unstable, highly prone to erratic behavior, and had a long, thoroughly documented history of abandoning critical projects and responsibilities. He explicitly stated that hiring me would be a massive, dangerous liability for their corporate culture and strongly advised them to look at other, more reliable candidates. My breath caught painfully in my throat. My own flesh and blood brother had actively, maliciously sabotaged my basic survival. He did not just want to beat me in the game of life. He wanted to ensure I could never even enter the race. He actively ensured I remained the struggling, pathetic, deeply flawed younger sibling, so he could effortlessly maintain his undisputed status as the flawless golden child of the family. But the sickening layers of betrayal did not stop there. In that exact same hidden folder, I found a downloaded, multi-page email chain between Preston and Uncle Charles. Charles, the man who brought me warm coffee, the man who patiently listened to my deepest fears and biggest dreams, had been methodically reporting every single detail of my life back to Preston and my father. He detailed my severe financial struggles, my moments of intense, crippling doubt, and my desperate, urgent need for that specific logistics job. Charles was not an ally. He was a paid spy. He traded my vulnerabilities and my deepest secrets for a better seat at my father's elite dinner table and a more favorable cut of the family's lucrative real estate investments. I sat absolutely frozen in the dark glow of my multiple monitors, feeling a cold, hollow emptiness spread rapidly through my chest, replacing the anger with pure ice. They did not just want me to fail naturally. They were actively, painstakingly engineering my total destruction. They wanted me broken, bankrupt, and publicly humiliated so I would eventually be forced to crawl back to them and beg for a low-level job answering their phones, forever indebted to their toxic mercy. I did not immediately confront them. Confrontation gives the enemy a chance to prepare their defenses and spin a new web of lies. Instead, I channeled every single ounce of that profound betrayal, every dark drop of that toxic anger, directly into the code. Marcus and I locked ourselves entirely away from the outside world. We completely stopped sleeping. We built the most robust, unbreakable, hyper-sophisticated logistics system the industry had ever seen. As the company grew rapidly and silently in the shadows, we eventually had to secure a small, private office space and hire a core development team. One of our lead developers was a brilliant woman named Elena. She was incredibly fast, highly efficient, and seemed totally dedicated to the grand vision of Quantum Nexus. But severe paranoia is a permanent, ugly scar when your own flesh and blood repeatedly stabs you in the back. I trusted absolutely no one fully. I set up advanced, highly classified internal security protocols that absolutely nobody else in the company knew about, silently tracking every single line of code downloaded, viewed, or transferred from our main secure servers. Exactly 1 week before we were scheduled to present our final, polished beta software to a massive consortium of international shipping conglomerates, the pivotal pitch that would permanently make or break us, my hidden security dashboard lit up bright, flashing red. Massive, heavily encrypted data packets were being rapidly routed to an unknown external server in the middle of the night. I tracked the complex IP address meticulously. It belonged directly to a dummy shell company owned by David, the aggressive, cutthroat CEO of our absolute biggest competitor in the logistics software space. Elena was actively stealing our proprietary source code. She was planning to sell our entire company's brain to a rival just days before our biggest pitch, likely for a massive, life-changing payout that would set her up for a comfortable early retirement. I did not panic. I did not scream, throw things, or call the police in a frantic rage. I walked calmly over to Elena's desk the very next morning. She looked up from her dual monitors, offering a sweet, perfectly innocent smile. I calmly asked her to step into the glass-walled hallway for a brief private chat. I handed her a thick, freshly printed file containing the exact, undeniable logs of her midnight data transfers, the precise IP routing traces, and a comprehensive draft of the massive, multimillion-dollar lawsuit my aggressive corporate lawyer had prepared 30 minutes prior. I looked her dead in the eyes, my voice entirely steady and barely above a whisper. I told her that the heavily encrypted code she had spent the last 3 hours frantically downloading the night before was actually a sophisticated decoy package heavily embedded with aggressive, self-replicating malware. I told her that if David even tried to open that file on his secure network, it would completely wipe his entire development server and irreversibly fry their expensive hardware. I fired her on the spot and informed her, with absolute chilling certainty, that if she ever spoke the name Quantum Nexus again, or contacted anyone in the logistics industry, I would bury her in so much legal debt her future grandchildren would be paying off the lawsuit. She turned a sickening shade of pale, her hands visibly shaking uncontrollably as she grabbed her designer bag and ran out of the building without uttering a single word of defense. I walked back into the main office, poured a fresh cup of black coffee, and told Marcus we had a massive pitch to win. That was the exact, defining moment I realized the scared little boy desperately seeking his family's approval was completely, utterly dead. I was a CEO now, and I was completely ready for war. 3 agonizing days before Preston's extravagant, highly anticipated engagement dinner at Le Jardin, the absolute silence in my apartment was deafening. My phone buzzed aggressively on the wooden desk, shattering the quiet focus of my morning. I looked down at the caller ID glowing on the screen. It was Preston. I stared at the screen for a long, heavy moment, my heart rate steady, before finally swiping to answer. He did not say hello. He did not ask how I was doing or if I was healthy. He launched straight into his typical condescending, highly commanding tone. He told me the engagement dinner was coming up this weekend and he knew things were probably incredibly tight for me, financially speaking. He actually chuckled over the line, a dry, deeply mocking sound that made my jaw clench tight enough to crack a tooth. He generously, arrogantly offered to wire me exactly $500. He told me to take the money and go buy a suit that did not look like it came from a cheap charity donation bin or a clearance rack at a discount store. He explicitly stated, in a voice absolutely dripping with unearned arrogance, that he wanted me to look somewhat presentable for Victoria. He said first impressions mattered in his world, and he simply could not have his struggling, eccentric, financially unstable brother ruining his flawless image in front of a major Silicon Valley powerhouse. Presentable. The deeply insulting word echoed loudly in my mind. He did not want to help me. He had zero desire to see me succeed. He wanted to curate me. He wanted to buy a cheap prop that fit neatly into the background of his perfect, wealthy, carefully constructed life. He wanted to ensure the expensive family portrait did not have any ugly, unpolished blemishes. I kept my voice dangerously calm, completely devoid of any emotional reaction that he desperately craved. I thanked him for the generous offer but politely, firmly declined, stating I already had something perfectly appropriate to wear. He pressed the issue aggressively, his tone shifting instantly from mocking to deeply irritated. He insisted he just wanted everything to be absolutely perfect and that I shouldn't be stubbornly proud about accepting a little family charity. I assured him, with absolute icy certainty, that everything would be exactly as it should be. I hung up the phone without waiting for his response and dropped the device onto the desk. What Preston did not see What none of them ever bothered to ask or care about for even a single second was the actual, undeniable reality of my life. While they were playing doubles tennis at the exclusive, members-only country club and loudly bragging about their clients' mutual fund returns in the locker room, I was on 4 in the morning conference calls with lead software developers in Zurich and senior logistics executives in Tokyo. While they were stressing over the specific floral arrangements and the strict seating charts for a pretentious dinner party, I was sitting in boardrooms closing a massive Series B funding round with a fierce consortium of international investors who clearly saw the absolute global dominance potential of Quantum Nexus. I turned my attention back to my massive, ultra-wide computer monitor. Displayed brightly on the screen was the final, legally binding corporate term sheet. The digital signatures were fully verified. The virtual ink was completely dry. Quantum Nexus had officially secured $40 million in Series B funding. The new corporate valuation of my company was now significantly, staggeringly higher than my father's entire wealth management firm, his diverse real estate holdings, and Preston's massive trust fund all combined. The profound irony was so thick, so incredibly potent, I could practically taste it in the stale air of my office. I had operated under a strict, ironclad non-disclosure agreement for many long months. The aggressive financial press knew the company name, they knew the revolutionary logistics product, and they definitely knew the massive valuation numbers, but they did not know the face or the name of the founder. I was known exclusively in the tight-knit, highly secretive industry circles simply as the Ghost of Chicago. I actively let the wild rumors swirl. I let the intense mystery build the hype, driving the company's valuation even higher with every passing week. And now the NDA was officially lifted. A major, highly respected investigative journalist at Bloomberg had reached out weeks ago, painstakingly piecing the complex puzzle together through obscure corporate filings and anonymous insider tips. I had finally granted the exclusive in-depth interview, formally confirming my true identity and my absolute sole ownership of the groundbreaking technology. The massive front-page feature article was scheduled to drop online exactly on the night of the engagement dinner, timed perfectly to the minute. I walked slowly to my small, cramped closet and intentionally bypassed the few decent, tailored suits I actually owned. I reached past the silk ties and the crisp, expensive dress shirts I saved for board meetings. I grabbed a plain, slightly faded, dark gray sweater. It was completely clean, it was neat, but it was far, far from a recognized designer label. It was exactly the kind of cheap, unremarkable clothing my family deeply despised, the kind of clothing that clearly signaled complete failure in their shallow, highly superficial world. I pulled it over my head and stood looking at my reflection in the full-length mirror. I did not look like a freshly minted billionaire tech founder. I looked exactly like Arthur Sterling, the ultimate family disappointment. And that was exactly the image I wanted them to see. I wanted them to feel vastly, undeniably superior. I wanted them to climb to the absolute peak of their blinding arrogance and self-importance. Because I knew, with absolute terrifying certainty, that the higher they climbed up that mountain of ego, the harder, faster, and more profoundly destructive the fall would be when the brutal gravity of reality finally kicked in. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, and walked out the heavy apartment door. The crisp, cool evening air hit my face as I hailed a yellow cab, directing the driver toward the upscale downtown restaurant district. I knew exactly what toxic environment was waiting for me inside the heavily guarded private room of Ljardin. I knew the snide comments, the dramatic eye rolls, the fake, condescending pity, and the suffocating, heavy judgment were all perfectly prepared and ready to be served maliciously alongside the ridiculously expensive wine and the imported caviar. I sat quietly in the back of the rattling cab, watching the bright city lights blur past the scratched window. My heart was completely, unnervingly steady. There was absolutely no lingering fear left in my body, no crippling anxiety about seeking their validation or approval. There was only a cold, sharp, deeply exhilarating anticipation. I was about to walk directly into the exact center of the eye of the storm, perfectly calm, perfectly aware that I was finally holding the lightning in my own 2 hands, ready to strike the ground and burn their entire illusion to ashes. I stepped out of the back of the rattling yellow cab and stood firmly on the pristine, sweeping cobblestone entrance of Ljardin. The crisp, biting evening wind of Chicago whipped around the tall buildings, but the restaurant itself seemed to exist in a completely different, heavily insulated climate. The heavy, polished mahogany front doors, adorned with intricate brass handles, were immediately held open by a perfectly postured greeter wearing a meticulously tailored tuxedo that undoubtedly cost significantly more than my very first car. I gave the elegant hostess the name for the private family reservation, and she guided me smoothly and silently through the crowded, dimly lit main dining floor. The entire restaurant hummed with the quiet, expensive, highly exclusive murmur of Chicago's absolute financial elite. Men in bespoke, hand-stitched Italian suits and women dripping in subtle, incredibly expensive diamond jewelry dined gracefully under massive, imported crystal chandeliers that cast a warm, golden glow over the room. I was led down a softly lit, heavily carpeted hallway toward the highly exclusive, heavily guarded wine cellar room reserved exclusively for VIP guests who spent thousands of dollars on a single Tuesday night. The thick, heavy oak door was standing slightly ajar, letting a sliver of light spill into the corridor. I could hear my father's booming, highly theatrical, completely fake laugh echoing into the quiet space before I even stepped my foot inside the private dining area. I took a deep breath, centering my mind, and walked in slowly. I took my designated seat at the far, isolated end of the long, heavily decorated dining table. The interpersonal dynamic in the room was exactly, perfectly as I had anticipated during my long, quiet cab ride across the city. My father, Richard, was actively, aggressively holding court at the absolute head of the table, exactly where he always demanded to sit. His heavy, solid gold luxury watch caught the dim, ambient light every single time. He gestured broadly to emphasize a point in his endless, self-serving stories. My mother, Eleanor, sat immediately to his right, playing the role of the devoted, supportive matriarch. Her posture was completely rigid, her spine perfectly straight, and her smile was entirely artificial and strained as she nodded along to whatever boring, self-aggrandizing anecdote my older brother, Preston, was currently reciting for the room. Preston sat right next to his fiancée, Victoria, his arm draped casually and heavily over the back of her expensive chair in a blatant, primitive display of territorial ownership. Uncle Charles was there too, sitting quietly at the far edge of the table, gently swirling and sipping an incredibly expensive vintage Cabernet. He was acting exactly like the supportive, grounded, relatable family member while secretly, deeply enjoying the toxic, oppressive hierarchy he had helped aggressively maintain by feeding my secrets to my father. The first two extravagant courses, a delicate beef tartare and a perfectly seared scallop dish, were slowly, methodically cleared away by silent, highly efficient waiters who moved around the private room like absolute ghosts wearing pristine white cotton gloves. The insults and the subtle, razor-sharp digs at my personal expense had been flowing steadily alongside the imported French wine for over an hour and a half. My father had spent a solid 20 minutes loudly discussing a high-profile, incredibly messy divorce case one of his wealthy wealth management clients was currently going through. He specifically, gleefully bragged to the table about how the man's ruthless corporate lawyer had aggressively, strategically, and successfully protected his massive commercial real estate portfolio and his offshore accounts from his soon-to-be ex-wife during the bitter, highly publicized custody battle over their 3 children. He actively used the tragic, broken family story to forcefully segue into a long, entirely unsolicited lecture about the extreme importance of protecting valuable family assets and securing ironclad prenuptial agreements. While he delivered this lecture, he kept looking directly down the length of the table at me, staring at my cheap thrift store sweater, acting as if I were a literal, imminent parasitic threat to their precious generational wealth. My mother then seamlessly chimed in, smoothly shifting the dinner topic to a recent, lavish, highly attended funeral they had gone to for a prominent local politician. She did not express a single ounce of genuine grief, sadness, or basic human sympathy for the grieving widow or the children. Instead, she spent 10 full minutes aggressively dissecting the massive financial inheritance the man had supposedly left behind. She leaned in close, lowering her voice conspiratorially, and aggressively gossiped about the vicious legal fight that was currently, inevitably brewing among the ungrateful heirs over a massive estate in the Hamptons. It was entirely, profoundly sickening to witness firsthand. My family viewed every single human interaction, every personal tragedy, every marriage, and every milestone purely through the cold, calculating, deeply cynical lens of financial gain and social leverage. To them, people were not actually human beings with feelings and souls. They were simply walking, breathing financial portfolios to be managed, ruthlessly exploited, or entirely ignored if their net worth was not high enough to matter. Preston, feeling the desperate, burning need to reclaim the center spotlight from my parents' endless stories, began bragging loudly and aggressively about his absolute latest corporate promotion at the family firm. He aggressively inflated his new base salary figures for the entire table to hear, tossing out massive numbers, and boasted loudly about the massive, unprecedented year-end holiday bonus he was supposedly expecting in a few short months. He looked directly at Victoria, his eyes hungry, desperate, and pleading for her validation and her impressed reaction. But Victoria simply offered a tight, incredibly polite, completely unreadable nod. She was a woman who was absolutely not easily impressed by flashy, fabricated numbers or men wearing expensive suits bought with their father's money. She built actual world-changing technology empires. She did not just passively manage other people's money and skim a hefty percentage off the top for doing absolutely nothing of real value. Then, exactly as I knew he eventually would, Preston turned his crosshairs directly onto me. He needed a target to elevate himself, and I was the designated punching bag. He asked me how my little, pathetic computer hobby was going, his voice dripping with heavy, unbearable, suffocating condescension. He loudly suggested, with a mocking, cruel smirk plastered across his face, that I should really look into getting a real, stable job with a reliable corporate salary and a matching 401k plan before I hit my 30s and became completely, hopelessly unemployable to the rest of civilized corporate society. He actually turned to Victoria, pointed his finger at me, and told her that my only real, viable retirement plan was blindly hoping to drain whatever was left of my childhood college fund that I had apparently wasted on buying cheap computer parts. The entire table, minus Victoria, erupted in genuine, cruel, booming, echoing laughter. They were actively, happily bonding over my perceived misery and my total lack of success. They had completely exhausted their usual tired, repetitive repertoire of jokes about my cheap, faded clothes, my supposed glaring lack of professional ambition, and my tiny, unheated studio apartment on the wrong side of the city. But they kept pushing anyway, digging deeper and deeper into their own bottomless pit of arrogance. The suffocating, deeply toxic atmosphere reached its absolute, unbearable, breaking peak when the final porcelain dessert plates, mostly untouched chocolate soufflés, were quietly removed from the table. The head waiter approached the table with quiet, practiced, submissive reverence and placed a thick, heavy black leather folder containing the massive, itemized dinner bill directly in front of my father. My father made a grand, sweeping, highly dramatic, theatrical show of slowly opening the leather folder. He deliberately glanced down at the astronomical total printed at the bottom of the receipt. It was a number that would easily, comfortably cover a massive down payment on a modest suburban house in any normal neighborhood in the country. He did not even flinch a single muscle in his face. He desperately, urgently wanted Victoria to see that this kind of exorbitant money was absolutely nothing to him, just minor pocket change for a man of his incredible, towering financial stature. He reached confidently into the inner silk breast pocket of his custom-tailored suit jacket and slowly, deliberately pulled out his heavy, metallic, highly exclusive black credit card. He placed it carefully, almost religiously ceremoniously, on top of the printed receipt, leaving it exposed, ensuring the waiter and every single person sitting at the long table saw exactly what kind of raw, unfiltered financial power he wielded in this city. He then looked directly down the length of the long table at me, fixing me with a stare. He put on a deeply tragic, entirely fake, condescending smile of paternal concern that made my stomach physically turn with absolute, bitter disgust. He told me, his voice projecting clearly, not to worry about pitching in for the customary 20% tip for the waitstaff. He said he had this entire expensive, multi-course dinner totally covered, and that I should just take my little pennies, gather up my spare change, and aggressively save them for my upcoming apartment rent so I did not get unceremoniously evicted from my sad, pathetic little studio and end up sleeping on his driveway. He spoke loudly, his booming voice echoing harshly off the stone walls of the private wine cellar, intentionally ensuring that the waiters clearing the glasses and the sommelier standing near the oak door heard every single humiliating, degrading word he spoke. The underlying, brutal message was crystal clear and perfectly, flawlessly delivered for maximum psychological damage. You are the permanent, unfixable charity case. You are a massive, embarrassing financial burden to this perfect family. You are fundamentally not one of us, you never have been, and you never, ever will be. I did not break eye contact with him for a single fraction of a second. I did not shrink down in my heavy wooden chair. I did not blush, and I did not look away in profound, expected shame. I just nodded slowly, once, my face a completely unreadable, frozen, unbreakable stoic mask. I let the heavy silence stretch out. I let the sheer, suffocating, blinding arrogance of his statement hang heavily in the air between us, polluting the room. The silence in my throat felt incredibly, terrifyingly powerful, exactly like a fully loaded, high-caliber weapon that I was simply waiting for the perfect, highly calculated second to discharge directly into their reality. I knew exactly what was currently sitting securely in my corporate bank accounts at that very moment. I knew exactly what the Bloomberg financial homepage looked like at this very exact second, broadcasting my identity to the entire financial world. I was entirely, completely, profoundly at peace in the absolute center of their manufactured, toxic, pathetic little storm. Victoria had been quietly, intensely, silently watching this entire horrific, abusive family dynamic play out all evening long. She had barely touched her second glass of expensive, imported wine. Her sharp, highly analytical, piercing eyes darted rapidly and intelligently between Preston's arrogant, highly punchable smirk, my father's bloated, completely unchecked ego, my mother's deeply complicit, enabling silence, and my absolute, unsettling, unwavering quiet calm. She was a brilliant woman who made a very lucrative, highly successful living reading complex people, evaluating ambitious founders under extreme pressure, and spotting absolute, hollow frauds from a mile away. She could clearly see the deep, irreversible, toxic rot at the very core of the Sterling family foundation. She finally, deliberately placed her heavy silver dessert fork down on the empty porcelain plate in front of her. The sharp, sudden metallic clink cut instantly through the smug, heavy, self-satisfied silence of the private room like a gunshot echoing in a canyon. She leaned forward, resting her elbows squarely and aggressively on the crisp white tablecloth. She entirely ignored my father. She entirely ignored my brother sitting right next to her. She directed her intense, heavily calculating, incredibly sharp gaze exclusively at me. The trap was officially perfectly sprung, the heavy steel jaws were wide open, and my family was standing right in the dead center of it, completely, blissfully unaware of the absolute, world-ending destruction that was about to rain down on their perfect little lives. Victoria looked directly at me, her expression entirely serious, her dark eyes boring into mine with an intense, unwavering, highly professional focus. She asked me, her voice completely devoid of any polite social pleasantries, any fake family warmth, or any gentle, casual curiosity, what the actual, registered legal name of my logistics company was. She stated clearly and firmly that she wanted to know exactly what I was supposedly building in that drafty, unheated apartment I apparently lived in. She demanded a real, concrete, professional answer and was absolutely, visibly refusing to accept the dismissive, pathetic, mocking jokes my family kept throwing around the table to deflect from the truth. Preston immediately groaned out loud, rolling his eyes dramatically and forcefully toward the vaulted brick ceiling in a massive show of intense, theatrical exasperation. He reached over quickly, aggressively trying to place his hand directly over hers to physically silence her inquiry and pull her attention back to him and his brand new suit. He told her, his voice dripping with annoyance, not to encourage my wild, pathetic, grandiose delusions. He said, with a heavy, performative sigh, that she dealt with actual verified unicorn founders, brilliant, world-changing visionaries who moved global markets and disrupted entire industries, and that I was just a lost kid playing around with a glorified, useless computer hobby that would inevitably go completely, humiliatingly bankrupt before the end of the current fiscal year. He laughed a dry, highly nervous, entirely forced laugh, desperately trying to steer her attention back to his own hollow achievements, his upcoming bonus, and his leased luxury car. Victoria completely, utterly ignored his physical touch. She did not even blink. She pulled her hand sharply and aggressively away from Preston's grasping fingers, treating him exactly like an annoying, irrelevant distraction, like a buzzing mosquito. Her eyes remained locked dead on mine, entirely unyielding, refusing to look away. She asked the exact question again, her tone shifting drastically from a polite dinner inquiry to demanding a direct, professional, absolute answer from a peer in the business world. My heart hammered a slow, heavy, incredibly powerful, thumping rhythm against my ribs. The adrenaline was icy cold in my veins. This was the exact, perfect, highly anticipated moment I had vividly envisioned during those countless, agonizing, lonely sleepless nights coding in the dark while they slept comfortably in their mansions. I sat up slightly straighter in my heavy wooden chair, rolling my shoulders back, resting my hands flat and calm on the heavy wooden table. I met her intense, searching, highly intelligent gaze and spoke two simple words in a clear, completely steady, absolutely unwavering voice. Quantum Nexus. Victoria physically froze in her chair. Her entire body went completely, terrifyingly rigid, as if a massive, high-voltage electrical current had just shot directly up her spine and locked her muscles in place. The polite, sophisticated, tolerant fiancé mask instantly vanished without a single, lingering trace. It was completely, instantly replaced by the ruthless, highly predatory, incredibly sharp, terrifying shark from Silicon Valley that had made her a feared multimillionaire in the venture capital world. The heavy, suffocating air in the private dining room suddenly felt completely electrified, vibrating intensely with a sudden, massive, undeniable, seismic shift in power. She repeated the name slowly, almost reverently, her voice barely a whisper but echoing loudly, the two words hanging heavy and incredibly dangerous in the quiet space. Quantum Nexus. She stared at me, her eyes widening in absolute, unadulterated, pure shock. She asked me, her voice trembling very slightly with a complex, chaotic mixture of total disbelief, sudden realization, and profound professional awe, if my actual legal corporate name was Arthur Vance Sterling. My father let out a loud, highly nervous, incredibly confused, booming laugh from the head of the table. He leaned forward aggressively, gripping his wine glass, desperately trying to reclaim control of the conversation that was rapidly, dangerously slipping from his desperate grasp. He stated loudly, almost shouting, that yes, obviously Sterling was our last name, and aggressively asked her what on earth her point was in asking such a stupid question. He was clearly intensely annoyed and deeply threatened that the spotlight had shifted completely away from him, his fake, performative generosity, and his precious, highly polished black credit card. Victoria did not even look at him. She did not even acknowledge his loud, booming voice. She looked exclusively, intensely at me with a complex mixture of absolute awe, professional terror, and sudden, undeniable, deep, genuine respect. She asked me, her voice dropping to a near, intense whisper, if I was the absolute sole founder and creator of the proprietary logistics software. She asked me if I was the ghost of Chicago, the anonymous, legendary, highly secretive tech billionaire her massive firm had been desperately tracking, researching, and begging for a simple meeting with for almost an entire, frustrating year. I simply nodded once, a slow, deliberate movement, holding her gaze perfectly. I reached calmly for my crystal water glass, the condensation cool against my fingers, and took a slow, highly deliberate sip of the iced water, letting the silence absolutely crush the room. Victoria whipped her head toward Preston so fast her dark, styled hair snapped aggressively across her tailored shoulders. Her voice rose, filling the entire room with a sharp, commanding, absolute, terrifying authority that demanded total, immediate silence from everyone present. She told Preston, her voice slicing through his ego like a scalpel, that he had explicitly, repeatedly promised to introduce her to high-level, brilliant visionaries in the city of Chicago. She told him, her voice absolutely dripping with pure, unadulterated venom and professional disgust, that her prestigious, multi-billion-dollar venture capital firm had been aggressively, desperately trying to secure a single, measly, pathetic 10-minute introductory meeting with the elusive, brilliant founder of Quantum Nexus for 8 straight, grueling months. She revealed to the entire stunned, paralyzingly silent, completely frozen table that her firm had a standing, fully authorized, board-approved offer to lead the upcoming Series B funding round with a massive, unprecedented capital injection. But, she added with a furious, burning glare directed squarely at Preston's pale face, they absolutely could not get past the ironclad, highly sophisticated, impenetrable legal firewall my elite corporate lawyers had built around my true identity. She reached furiously into her expensive, structured designer handbag, pulled out her sleek smartphone, and rapidly typed on the screen with visibly shaking, adrenaline-fueled fingers. She slammed the phone face up onto the center of the crisp white tablecloth, the impact making the silverware rattle, pushing it aggressively directly toward my father and Preston. It was the live, currently updating Bloomberg financial homepage. The massive, bold, unmissable headline took up the entire top half of the glowing screen, screaming the truth into the silent room. The invisible unicorn. How Quantum Nexus became a $40 million disruptor in absolute silence. There was no photograph of my face on the article, just the sleek, geometric, highly recognizable, globally trademarked logo of my company. But right there, explicitly bolded in the very first paragraph of the explosive, highly detailed feature article, was my full legal name, Arthur Van Sterling, sole founder and CEO. Victoria pointed a perfectly manicured, visibly trembling finger directly at the glowing screen. She looked directly at my father, her eyes narrowed, her voice dripping with absolute, unfiltered, pure, sickening disgust. She asked him if this massive, globally recognized corporate enterprise was the pathetic little, boring project he was just loudly mocking a minute ago. She asked if the verified billionaire founder sitting calmly across the table from him was the exact same young man he just told to save his pennies for rent so he wouldn't get violently evicted onto the street. My father stared down blindly at the glowing smartphone screen. His face rapidly drained of all blood and color until he looked exactly like a terrifying, lifeless, grotesque wax figure in a museum. His jaw went completely slack, hanging wide open in sheer, unadulterated, paralyzing disbelief. He looked like he was having a stroke. My mother's mouth opened wide, a perfect O of shock, but absolutely no sound came out of her throat. She looked as though all the oxygen had been violently, instantly sucked directly from her lungs, her trembling hands clutching her expensive, imported pearl necklace so tightly the string looked ready to snap. Preston looked frantically, wildly, from the glowing Bloomberg article, to Victoria's furious face, and finally to me, sitting perfectly still, his arrogant expression completely fractured, shattering into a million pieces, revealing a pathetic, highly visible, agonizing mixture of absolute shock, rabid, burning, sickening jealousy, and pure, unadulterated, undeniable horror. Uncle Charles sat entirely frozen in his chair, his posture rigid, his wine glass hovering inches from his open mouth, suddenly realizing the pathetic, treacherous, two-faced spy game he played had just completely, irreversibly, and permanently ruined him forever. All the vicious insults, all the toxic labels, all the years of psychological abuse, charity case, failure, massive disappointment, permanent work in progress, hung thickly in the air above the table. They were suddenly highly radioactive, incredibly embarrassing, and completely, utterly, undeniably ridiculous. My entire family was actively, physically choking on their own massive, unchecked arrogance. My father finally managed to stammer. He aggressively, desperately gripped the edge of the heavy wooden table, his knuckles turning stark, bone white as he tried to ground himself in a reality that was rapidly dissolving. He sputtered blindly, his voice weak, pathetic, and entirely stripped of its usual booming authority, that he had absolutely no idea, that I had never, ever told them anything about a massive corporate valuation, a booming global tech company, or a highly publicized Series B funding round. Victoria cut him off instantly. Her voice was as cold, hard, and unforgiving as solid industrial steel. She told him he did not know because he fundamentally, deliberately, and arrogantly never bothered to ask. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far, you're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. For the very first time in my entire 29 years of existence, my highly vocal, incredibly opinionated, overwhelmingly arrogant, constantly criticizing family had absolutely, undeniably nothing to say. The silence in that highly exclusive private dining room was the most beautiful, intricate, deeply satisfying, and profound symphony I had ever heard in my entire life. It was not the agonizing, dismissive, isolating silence of being completely ignored, which I had endured every single day of my entire childhood. It was the heavy, crushing, undeniable, absolute silence of a toxic, decades-old hierarchy completely crumbling into fine dust in a matter of a few short, devastating seconds. The sheer, massive weight of their own exposed, arrogant ignorance was actively, physically suffocating them where they sat. They were completely, utterly paralyzed by the massive, undeniable weight of the truth. I did not yell. I did not stand up, scream, and aggressively flip the heavy wooden table, ruining the expensive crystal and china. I did not demand tearful, pathetic apologies or aggressively, childishly rub my massive financial success in their pale, deeply shocked, terrified faces. True power never requires a loud, embarrassing temper tantrum or a dramatic, highly emotional public display. True, absolute, terrifying power is unshakable, unbreakable stillness. I simply reached down and calmly picked up my white linen napkin from my lap. I folded it neatly, deliberately, perfectly aligning the corners, and placed it gently down next to my half-eaten dessert plate. I stood up slowly, taking my absolute time, smoothing the front of the plain, dark gray thrift store sweater I had intentionally, strategically chosen to wear specifically for this exact, highly anticipated moment. I looked directly at Victoria, completely and totally ignoring the very existence of my blood relatives sitting entirely paralyzed and broken beside her. I smiled warmly, a genuine, completely authentic expression of deep professional respect. I told her, my voice clear and polite, that it was an absolute pleasure to finally meet her in person, completely removing all the messy, personal family drama from my professional tone. I instructed her to have her senior partners call my executive assistant on Monday morning at exactly 9 o'clock sharp. I told her we could officially, formally discuss the Series B allocation, assuming her firm was still aggressively interested in securing a highly coveted minority stake in Quantum Nexus. Victoria nodded instantly. The absolute, paralyzing shock on her face was entirely, completely replaced by fierce, highly calculated, predatory business acumen. She grabbed her expensive phone off the table and slipped it smoothly into her tailored jacket pocket, signaling clearly and definitively to everyone in the room that the social, familial, personal portion of this evening was completely, permanently, and irreversibly terminated. I spoke again, my voice entirely steady, echoing clearly and sharply in the painfully quiet room. I announced calmly, as if discussing the weather, that I had a major corporate board meeting at 7 in the morning and needed to head home to review some final, highly sensitive, multimillion-dollar legal contracts. I told them, gesturing to the table, to enjoy the rest of the expensive vintage wine they loved so incredibly much. I looked directly into my father's terrified, wide, suddenly very old eyes and delivered the final, fatal, undeniable, crushing blow. I asked him to explicitly confirm that he definitely had the massive bill covered, just like he loudly, proudly, and arrogantly promised a few minutes ago. I turned my back on them and walked smoothly out of the private room. I did not look over my shoulder. The cool, crisp night air of the city hit my face as I exited the building, and I took the deepest, cleanest, most liberating breath of my entire life. The suffocating, massive weight I had carried since childhood was entirely, permanently gone. Back in the restaurant, the immediate aftermath was an absolute, unmitigated, highly destructive bloodbath. The exact moment I walked out those heavy oak doors, Victoria stood up abruptly. Her intense, palpable disgust was a tangible, heavy force in the room. She looked down at Preston, the man who had blatantly, maliciously lied about his own brother's mental stability and professional competence to aggressively sabotage a job interview just to protect his fragile, pathetic ego. She took off the massive, custom-designed, flawless diamond engagement ring. She placed it squarely and heavily in the exact center of the table, right next to the leather folder containing the astronomical bill my father was now forced to pay. She told Preston, in a voice of absolute ice, that she absolutely could not legally, professionally, or morally bind herself to a family that operated with such profound, disgusting, relentless, sociopathic cruelty. She grabbed her expensive coat and walked out without looking back once. The profound ruin did not stop there. 6 incredibly fast, highly productive months passed. While my professional life actively soared into the absolute stratosphere, breaking every projection, my family's financial reality violently, tragically crashed directly into the ground at terminal velocity. Sterling Financial was heavily, uncontrollably bleeding high-net-worth clients at an unprecedented historic rate. The highly damaging rumors of their toxic behavior, their cruelty, and their massive incompetence had spread rapidly through the city's elite circles. Preston was deeply, dangerously spiraling, heavily burdened by massive, unpayable personal debts and a rapidly crashing, utterly destroyed career. He had foolishly, arrogantly leveraged everything he owned on the absolute assumption he was marrying into Victoria's massive wealth. Desperation breeds severe, highly destructive, deeply embarrassing delusion. My father, facing the imminent, highly public, totally humiliating collapse of his boutique wealth management firm, foolishly agreed to a major, live, unedited sit-down interview with a prominent national financial news network. When the polished news anchor brought up my massive success and the global rise of Quantum Nexus, my father leaned directly into the camera lens. He completely, maliciously, and desperately fabricated a massive, easily disprovable story. He lied straight through his expensive veneers on national television, stating that Sterling Financial had provided the critical, early-stage seed funding, my entire college fund, and the strategic corporate mentorship that allowed Quantum Nexus to officially get off the ground and become a unicorn. He aggressively, pathetically attempted to publicly claim credit for my entire life's work to save his own sinking ship. Exactly 2 hours after my father's disastrous, highly fabricated, highly illegal interview aired, Victoria went live on the exact same national financial network. She was now a lead senior partner on the Quantum Nexus board of directors. She sat in the bright studio, looking fiercely professional and totally unforgiving. She methodically, ruthlessly, surgically, and entirely dismantled his entire, pathetic lie on live national television. She exposed the cold, hard, verifiable fact that I entirely self-funded the initial software development from my own meager salary, eating instant noodles, without a single solitary dime of family support. She explicitly, coldly mentioned that a massive, multimillion-dollar defamation and fraud lawsuit was already being prepared and filed by my ruthless corporate lawyers against Richard Sterling and Sterling Financial for his fraudulent public claims. It was a highly public, entirely irrefutable, completely devastating corporate execution. The stock price of the few publicly traded assets Sterling Financial held plummeted instantly, wiping out massive amounts of their remaining wealth. The villain had finally, completely, and permanently fallen by his own arrogant sword. I stand today, perfectly calm and deeply focused, in my expansive, sunlit corner office on the absolute top floor of the Quantum Nexus global corporate headquarters. The massive, spotless floor-to-ceiling glass windows offer an uninterrupted, breathtaking, panoramic view of the sprawling, busy Chicago skyline. The city looks entirely, fundamentally different from way up here. The cold, unforgiving, dirty streets where I used to walk, highly anxious and completely broke, heavily feeling the crushing, suffocating weight of my family's deep, unrelenting disappointment, now look like a complex, highly solvable, deeply fascinating grid of massive logistical opportunities waiting to be optimized. The immediate, highly predictable fallout of Victoria's devastating, surgical television interview was absolute, total, and permanent. My secure, private phone rang incessantly, vibrating across my desk for 3 straight days. It was Preston, leaving increasingly frantic, deeply desperate, pathetic voicemails begging for a short-term corporate loan, pleading with me to cover his aggressive margin calls and save his rapidly sinking, highly leveraged real estate investments. It was my mother, crying hysterically, sobbing into the receiver, pleading with me to issue a public statement defending the family honor, begging me to withdraw the massive defamation lawsuit before it bankrupted them entirely. I did not answer a single solitary call. I permanently, irrevocably blocked their phone numbers from my device. I blocked their email addresses from the corporate server. I instructed the heavy, highly trained, armed security detail at my downtown corporate headquarters to permanently, physically ban any member of the Sterling family from entering the building under any circumstances whatsoever. I drew an absolute, impenetrable, deeply necessary red line in the sand. I finally realized with complete clarity that keeping highly toxic people in your life out of a misplaced, deeply ingrained, completely fabricated sense of biological obligation is the absolute fastest, most certain way to poison your own hard-earned success. I had completely surgically cut out the deep infection, and for the first time in my entire 29-year-old life, I was perfectly, undeniably, profoundly healthy in my mind and my spirit. When I look back on the relentless cruelty, the highly calculated, deeply personal betrayals, the endless mockery, and the deeply humiliating, incredibly toxic family dinners that entirely defined my youth, I do not feel a lingering, heavy sense of tragedy or victimhood. I realize now, with absolute, unshakable crystal clarity, that their aggressive, relentless rejection was the absolute greatest, most valuable gift they could have ever possibly given me. If my father had actually genuinely handed me that pathetic, entry-level, soul-crushing internship, if Preston had actually been a supportive, loving older brother instead of a jealous, backstabbing rival, I would have been comfortably, permanently, and happily trapped in their toxic, highly superficial, incredibly shallow world forever. I would have spent my entire adult life desperately trying to measure up to their incredibly shallow, meaningless metrics of success, managing boring real estate portfolios for arrogant people I fundamentally despised, and wearing uncomfortable, itchy designer suits to fit in. Their profound, highly vocal, incredibly cruel lack of faith in me violently forced me to build an unbreakable, highly resilient, absolutely solid foundation entirely on my own 2 feet. It violently forced me to find my own brilliant, highly capable, fiercely loyal tribe, people exactly like Marcus and Victoria, who deeply value intense execution, unwavering loyalty, and undeniable, concrete reality over cheap, empty, fabricated perception. My profound purpose in life is no longer seeking basic validation from broken people who are fundamentally, psychologically incapable of giving it. My purpose is building massive, scalable solutions that actively change the entire world, and fiercely protecting the deep, quiet peace I fought so incredibly hard to secure for myself. To anyone watching this video right now who is sitting quietly, feeling entirely suffocated at a tense, angry dinner table, feeling completely invisible and entirely misunderstood. To anyone whose family treats their massive, world-changing dreams like a pathetic joke or a temporary, embarrassing phase, I want you to listen to me very, very carefully. You do not ever, under any circumstances, have to blindly accept the incredibly small, deeply suffocating, highly restrictive box that other people, even your own blood relatives, try to aggressively force you into. You absolutely do not owe your loyalty, your precious time, or your hard-earned financial success to people who explicitly demand your complete, unquestioning submission and your total failure in exchange for their basic, highly conditional, incredibly toxic love. Do not waste your precious, limited emotional energy screaming at them or trying to forcefully make them understand your vision. Do not waste a single, fleeting second of your valuable time trying to aggressively prove your worth to people who are entirely, stubbornly, and aggressively committed to misunderstanding you. Their profound, deep-seated ignorance is their own heavy, deeply unfortunate burden to carry to their graves, not yours. Take all of that intense anger, all of that deep, burning humiliation, all of the sharp, lingering pain from the snide comments and the cruel, mocking jokes, and channel it directly, ruthlessly, and silently into your own quiet, dedicated work. Build your massive, world-altering empire in the absolute quiet shadows. Let them loudly, arrogantly laugh at you. Let them mock your cheap clothes and your old car. Let them aggressively brag about their hollow, least achievements and their fake, empty titles. Work relentlessly, tirelessly, and obsessively while they sleep their hangovers away. Learn constantly and voraciously while they party and gossip. Build an impenetrable, absolute, highly profitable fortress of real, undeniable value. And when the time is absolutely perfectly right, when your foundation is completely unshakable and your massive success is undeniable to the entire world, step out directly into the bright light and let the massive, crushing, undeniable weight of your reality completely, utterly shatter their entire fragile, fabricated illusion. Because the absolute sweetest, most deeply satisfying, incredibly profound revenge in the entire world is not actively destroying your enemies or screaming in their faces. It is outgrowing them so completely, so totally, and so absolutely, that they become entirely, permanently irrelevant to your spectacular, beautifully successful, and incredibly peaceful life. Have you ever faced something incredibly similar with your own family? Have you ever had to silently, painfully cut off highly toxic relatives to protect your own brilliant future and your precious mental health? Share your powerful, deeply personal story in the comments below, and do not forget to explicitly like and subscribe so you do not miss the next incredible journey. Thank you for listening.